Well, if you need any more proof that Game Pass is not a sustainable model for the video game industry, here you have the creator of the Ori series telling the fans on Twitter to buy the game on Steam and not play it on Game Pass because Game Pass actually hurts the developer when everyone's just playing it on Game Pass and not actually buying the game. And it seems like common sense, but the reason why I'm talking about this is because you have so many delusional Xbox fanboys that say that Game Pass is this universally great thing that has no downsides whatsoever and is just amazing. It always benefits the developer. Any game that's part of Game Pass is always a success because it's on Game Pass. And you have all these developers talking about how great Game Pass was for their game, and it's just, yeah, you can't say anything bad about it because you'd be wrong if you said anything negative about Game Pass. Well, here's the thing. Can Game Pass be a good thing for certain developers? The answer is yes, of course it can be. Especially if it's a less established indie studio where the success of the game on Steam or any other platform is not guaranteed because it's an obscure developer, obscure game that no one's ever heard of before. Microsoft pays a flat fee to put the game on Game Pass, and it could be enough, the fee can be enough to keep some of these studios above board and still operate in business. So I'm not gonna be the opposite of these idiots and say Game Pass is always a negative thing. It can be beneficial for certain developers and certain games, especially older games that have already kind of run its course in terms of game sales and all that. And it being a part of Game Pass can breathe new life into a game, new life into a series. Think of the Titanfall series, for example, being on Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play. Think of the MCC. You have a lot more people playing it because it's on Game Pass, and soon to be the entire catalog of Call of Duty. All the older games are going to have a resurgence when they officially become a part of Game Pass, and especially if they add all the DLCs. I think they will. Hopefully they will. That would be really cool. So I'm not saying that Game Pass is just this awful thing, always an awful thing. But when we get into the conversation of Game Pass, and obviously there's going to be other subscription models popping up in the future with the success of Game Pass, the subscription Netflix type model for video games is going to become a more mainstream thing over the next few years. What's going to happen is the consumer is going to be more accustomed to engaging with that type of model where they pay a flat monthly fee and play most of their games that way, and, they see a game that comes out for $60, $70, they're like, well, I pay $15, $20 a month to have hundreds of games. Why am I going to pay $70 on top of that for one game? I can guarantee you that's the mentality that people are going to start to have, so there are a lot of games that are great and are not part of these subscription models, but because they're not part of the subscription model, people aren't going to want to really play it. It's eventually going to change the way that people play games, the way that people's standards when it comes to games, because it's like, oh, it's just part of Game Pass. I pay $20 a month anyway to play this game out of the hundreds of other games I have, so I'm not going to really have the same level of expectations as I did when I used to pay $70 for each of my games. You see where the problem is headed, right? It's going to further dilute the quality and integrity of video games as a form of art, and we've been getting that problem lately with all these companies chasing the live service trend. Well, a subscription future with video games is going to be 10 times worse than what we have right now, because mediocrity will no longer be the standard in gaming, which it currently is, but it'll be rather the expectation. You get what you pay for, which is practically nothing. So yes, if you want high quality games, you ought to pay a premium price for them. Doesn't mean you should be a blind consumer and always pay full price for all these shitty games that have been coming out, but for a game that is really good, like an Ori, yeah, if you love those games and you want a sequel and you want the studio to remain in business and be successful, then you should buy the game on Steam and not just freeload it off of Game Pass. Now, on the other hand, they signed that contract. Phil Spencer didn't put a gun to their head and said, you need to put the game on Game Pass and not have it on PlayStation. That contract was signed by them, and they own that, and obviously they seem to now be regretting that deal, but it's a deal that they signed themselves, and, I'm not going to call Microsoft a supervillain for having that in place where it can't go on PlayStation. It still sucks, but it's a good thing that Microsoft has decided to step up and put their own games on PlayStation instead.